to the entertaining Talkin' Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video as I continue the offseason coverage. And before I jump into the potential free agents that I could see the New York Giants really diving into and going after, being that is the first, step in the offseason process, of course you have the draft after that, and we're going to mix and match, and we're going to go over some of the rumors of potential players that the New York Giants may have interest in both scenarios, and I'll give my opinion throughout the entire offseason. And there'll be plenty of content to talk about it. We'll have mock drafts and everything else. And I'm sure there'll be rumors along the way. May have another video up today as well. Haven't decided yet. But in this video, I wanted to go over cap space. And of course, cap space in the NFL is very important. And we all know as Giants fans, and this is estimated right now, that the Giants and every other team in the league is going to be starving for cap space. This year, the cap space was $198 million. But due to the fact that people weren't going to the stadiums because of the virus, it is projected that the cap space will be $175 million. And in this exercise, I'm going to go over how the New York Giants could maximize their cap space, some of the things they could do to think outside the box to get themselves to that $50 million number. I think if they could get to that number, it gives them some freedom to potentially bring in a big piece or two in free agency. And I'll jump into all the names in the coming weeks of players that I could see the New York Giants really getting into. And then in the end, I will go over my plan as to what I would do if I was the general manager of the New York Giants regarding free agency. But I wanted to jump into the cap space. In my previous video, I showed you guys the number, and the number is just this. It's negative $2.284 million. So for the sake of the exercise, we're going to round down just to make it a round number. It's negative $2 million. And there's a number of things that the New York Giants can do, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics in this video, all the little moves, but you could probably create an additional $3, $4, $5 million by making small cuts or redistributing salaries throughout the roster on smaller deals. But I'm going to go over all the big things that the Giants could really jump into and some of the players that maybe they could backload some contracts. And normally, I am very against backloading contracts. But in an environment like this, and the fact that the New York Giants have players that aren't really tied down to long-term commitments, I think it is appropriate for the Giants and most teams in the NFL to try to redistribute that salary for the simple reason being that when we sign these players, we sign them based off the assumption that they were going to be playing under a $198 million salary cap last year and an increased salary cap the following year, $210, $215 million. Well, now it's $175. So the Giants and a lot of teams in the NFL will have to think outside the box and will have to backload and redistribute some of this salary. But yes, if you're a Giants fan, you look at that and you say to yourself, how are we going to do anything this offseason? We're at negative $2 million. Well, we're going to start here. The first person we're going to look at is one of the more obvious cuts, in my opinion, this offseason, and that, of course, being Kevin Zeitler. The top numbers his salary this year was $12.5 with a $15 million dead cap hit. The bottom line, he's making $14.5, but only has a $2.5 million dead cap hit. And if you were to make this cut right out of the gate, you would save $12 million. It would bump that negative 2 up to 10, and we're going to add along the way. Now, maybe the New York Giants could redistribute his salary. People have talked about that. Rather than cutting him, Zeitler may look at it like, listen, I want to play football and I want to play for the Giants. I like what we're building. I like the continuity that we have on the offensive line, and I want to stay here. And maybe they could give him an extra year and redistribute it that way. Maybe you give him $8 million a year over 2 years rather than $14.5 this year. But I think players like him are going to have to be understanding. The other thing that I think us as fans need to realize is this is going to be happening for every team in the league. There are going to be players like Kevin Zeitler that hit free agency, and the market will be flooded. And when the market is flooded and teams don't have enough money to provide them, they are going to have to lower their demands. It's just the way it works. I've talked about that the salary cap is going to be approximately 12 to 15% lower than last year's salary and about 20% lower, or even more, I think, than initially anticipated. So expect, salaries to be 15% lower than initially anticipated. If you projected to make 20, well, now you're going to knock that down to 17 because it has to fit the cap. Next guy I want to talk about is this. So we're at $10 million right now. Let's just say we cut Kevin Zeitler. Next guy up on our list is Golden Tate. Golden Tate next year is due to make $10.85 million and has a $4.7 million hit. And I talked about going into the season. It has nothing to do with the thing that have happened within the season that I just don't think he's going to be in the budget. I think the Giants are going to have to cut salary. And that was before knowing that they were going to shrink this salary cap to $175 million. I think the Giants will address wide receiver in free agency and potentially the draft, or at least one or the other, in a big-time way. And I think they'll replace Tate by moving Shepard to the slot and getting themselves a weapon on the outside. But that $6.1 million is just too much in terms of savings. I don't think they'll be able to trade Golden Tate. He doesn't have a ton of value, especially with that salary that he still commands. But that 6.1, we're going to bring it onto the salary, and suddenly we're at $16 million. 16.1, but we'll round down to $16 million for the sake of the exercise. And then finally, you have Nate Solder, and this is the other big cut, and then we're going to get into some other things that the New York Giants could do. We're at $16 million right now. Nate Solder is due to make $16.5. He carries a $10.5 million dead cap hit. Now, from what I've read, if I remember correctly, if they do it after June 1st, it would save them 10. But for the sake of the exercise, we're going to be very conservative, and we're going to say it's only going to save them 6. And some may say you're going to pay $10.5 million to cut him. I would say yes, at least in my opinion. I think you want Parrott to develop. Maybe you draft another tackle as well to compete. But right now, Nate Solder makes too much. He's coming off a year out of the NFL. He's got the problem with his child. He may retire. We'll have to wait and see, but we're going to think worst-case scenario here, and we're going to save $6 million by cutting Nate Solder. So that 16 now bumps up to 22. What are some other things that you could do for the New York Giants? Well, here is a list of some players that the New York Giants could cut. Not all the players on the list, but they were kind of all bunched together. You're obviously not going to cut. I don't think they will cut Riley Dixon. It's possible. He's making a lot for a punter. If you were to do that, it would be another 2.7. I'm not going to say that. We're at 22 right now. I think you cut Toiolo, who would be almost $3 million in savings. I think you cut Pulley, who would be $2.75 million in savings. I think you cut Mayo, who would be $2.3, and I think you cut Cody Core, who would be $2 million. None of them have a dead cap hit, and if you add it all up, 2.95 will round up to 3. That's $3 million. 2.75 plus 2.3 is about 5. That's $8 million plus Core's 2 is $10 million. So you're going to take that 10, you're going to add it to the 22, and suddenly we're at $32 million. And like I said, there's probably a couple of other small cuts that the Giants could make, redistribution of salary that I'm not going to go over, that could probably bump you up to the 35, 36, maybe even $37 million range. So let's say we're at about 35 right now. And then that is going to take us to our bigger salaried players and some of the things that the New York Giants could do to try to create even more additional cap space, at least in my opinion. And I didn't pull up the names, but the guys that I'm going to be looking at here are Sterling Shepard, Blake Martinez, and James Bradbury. This is Martinez's salary. He's due to make $10.25 this year, $10.525 next year. Now, you got one or two options here if you're the Giants. It's only a 2-year commitment. You could extend Martinez and give him an additional year commitment. Martinez has expressed that he wants to stay with the New York Giants, and if you were to do that, you could spread the money out more evenly, or you could backload more money to next year's salary. You can make it, say, 7.25 and tack on an additional $3 million next year and figure it out next year to give yourself an additional $3 million in cap space this year. The next guy you can look at is, this would be Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard's due to make $10.5 and $11.5 the following 2 years. Next year, he's due to make $9. Again, maybe you'd redistribute $2 million on each of the next 2 years, so you're only paying him $5 million this year. That's another way to get creative. So that could bump us up another $4 million. So it was at 30, I think it was 32. I said 35 or 36 with some other small cuts. You've just added another $6 or $7 million. And then you could say the same thing for James Bradbury. And Bradbury is due to make, I pulled up the wrong slide there, 1 second. Bradbury is due to make a boatload of money over the next 2 years, 17.25 and 16.5. And you could get creative. You could give him another year, or you could, again, back up $3 million into next year's cap. With those 3 players, I figure you could save about 10, and a couple of other small redistributions, you could save another 3 or 4, or smaller cuts. In the end, I do think the Giants are going to be in that $45 to $50 million range if they do these things. And I think they're going to have to be, because I think the Giants are going to have a lot of big decisions on their mind. Whether they bring back Leonard Williams, whether they bring back Dalvin Tomlinson, you're going to need money to do that. And if you want to go out there and bring in one big piece, you're going to need in that $40 to $45 million range. Now, of course, the Giants may elect to not do all of these things. Maybe they keep Kevin Zeitler. Maybe they don't redistribute salary. But with the Giants having, these aren't long-term commitments that they have to these players. I think it is the prudent and smart approach in a year like this, when the cap is shrinking as much as it is. You're talking about a $40 million difference from what you expected. I think you have no choice but to backload some of these contracts to give yourself some wiggle room to try to bring in some players. So those are some of the things that I expect the New York Giants to do this offseason, and it is how I think they will get to that $45 to $50 million range. And after they do it, well, that's when I'll jump into some of my future videos, some of the players that the New York Giants could target. But as always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.